Ravenbeak, the main villain of the best-selling Metroid game, and either you love him or you hate him. I like him. I don't love him, I understand a lot of the criticisms, but I think he's pretty cool overall, and he has a lot going for him that few other Metroid villains do. Advantages which I hope that Silex will have whenever Prime 4 comes out. Then, for the criticisms, which as I said I understand them, I have my fair share of counter-arguments for most of them as well. So, here we go. In defense of Ashkar Behek. The Chozo have always been depicted in Metroid as ancient, benevolent beings that have given the galaxy many helping hands before their untimely extinction. At least, before the Mocking came along and decided to simply be the Chozo but evil. Although, even before then, I feel like the Chozo were a lot more morally gray than we tend to realize, and have been the source of conflict a few times long before Metroid Dread. For one, they made the Metroid, which ended up being the main thread of the series, but of course, this was to combat the X-Parasites, yada yada yada. They get, like, a pass on that one. A pass, they get some squinty eyes, but they get a pass. But the other main threat that the Chozo are responsible for is much less excusable. The threat goes as far back as the series' Metroids do, and is arguably just as iconic as the Metroids, if not more. That's right, I'm talking about Mother Brain. The Chozo built AI supercomputer who went rogue and has had basically the same ideals as Ravenbeak since the series first started. Mother Brain was programmed by the Chozo, and the ideals of the Chozo, the benevolency, whatever, would have been all she knew. As a matter of fact, it may have been hard-coded into her brain so that she wouldn't have been able to go against them. Kinda like the Thunderhead in Scythe and all the rules that he has. Yet, she still joined the Space Pirates. The Chozo-ness would have had to run deep into her coding. Possibly deeper than in the blood of an actual Chozo, yet she joined Ridley with the plan to do the same thing that Ravenbeak wanted, and unlike Ravenbeak, she's received no scorn for being evil, Chozo thing, whatever, because of course, she was literally the first Metroid villain ever. We knew about her before we knew about the Chozo. And I guess her evil plans are fine because she's not genetically a Chozo. Mother Brain isn't the only black mark on the Chozo's record pre-Ravenbeak. We already knew that they have a warrior history. They equipped Samus with a lot of high-tech weapons while she was at the age where most parents wouldn't be happy about their kids swinging sharpened sticks around. All the planets they've inhabited have had random weapon modules or missile tanks around every corner, just lying there for people to find. Some weapons are important, sure, you don't want some outsiders to come to your planet, take it over, and slaughter you with no resistance at all. But that many lying around everywhere? It's sus. It is sus. The one other thing I feel like I should mention to counter-argue how the Mocking ruins the Chozo benevolence is that aside from Mother Brain, all this evil and malice and power hunger is just the Mocking, who I am nigh certain did not inhabit any of the other Chozo colonies we've seen. Okay? All those other Chozo are just as benevolent and peaceful as they were before Metroid Dread. Zebo's Chozo even did that thing I mentioned earlier about letting outsiders in and slaughtering them all without a fight. Okay, we don't know how much of a fight they put up, but I assume since they'd be mostly on, near, or above the same level as Samus, since they trained her, and considering how one Samus was able to wipe out the entirety of the Space Pirates, there's no way that the pirates would succeed in invading an entire planet of people on par with her. So, the Zebus Chozo probably didn't put up much resistance. So, the evil Chozoism is just the Mocking. It didn't ruin the character of the Chozo on any of these planets. They are entirely separate to those dudes. They are completely fine. Just the Mocking and Mother Brain. It's not hard to believe that a race with a warrior history as deeply ingrained as the Chozo would not have every single sect of them be purely good. Anyway, now it's time to discuss what gives the Mocking, particularly Ravenbeak himself, a step above all the other villains of Metroid. Actual interaction. Now, I am very on board with how isolationist the Metroid series is, and I really hope it never leaves that isolation theme behind for a narrative filled to the brim with NPCs. Corruption's prologue. But I don't know, I don't mind it when it's just one person who's talking. Adam or an Aurora unit telling Samus what to do through a console, it's fine as long as they don't talk too much. Umas, or however that's pronounced, or Quiet Robe giving Samus exposition on what the hell happened on this planet, perfectly fine. We only see both of them like a few times anyway. Samus herself talking to the player at the beginning of the Metroid games to give us a recap, grateful for that one actually. It'd be tough for new players who haven't played the old games to figure out what's going on otherwise, plus the background music during these is a banger. And a villain doing an evil monologue to Samus while she simply points her gun at them and says or does one thing to move things along. Awesome. And it's a shame we've only had this with Ravenbeak. Seriously, Ravenbeak is the only villain to actually talk to Samus in a Metroid game. Aside from, I guess, Adam while he was still working for the slowly corrupting Federation. The rest of the villains, we're either told what they're up to beforehand through the manual or an opening cutscene, we learn about them through scans, we're told about them by someone else, or they're just the strongest member of a species of bad guys we've been fighting the entire time. The one who's had the most interaction with Samus before this has probably been Dark Samus. And even then, while the two of them have been face-to-face a lot and done a lot of shit to each other, we only really know what her deal is from scans, being told by other NPCs, general inference, and her physical actions that we see her do. The only voice we hear from her is an evil act. Now, granted, Dark Samus is an awesome villain, and in her case, I think the lack of actual conversation works to her benefit. Besides, we do talk to the other hunters who are being mind-controlled by her, so close enough. But besides Dark Samus, the rest of the Metroid cast could really benefit from talking to us like Ravenbeak does, assuming it doesn't go full Prime 3 prologue on us, or God forbid, other end levels of dialogue. One of the main reasons I want Ridley to come back in Prime 4 or Metroid 6 or one other Metroid game, even though he's dead, is because outside of the manga, which portrays him amazingly, he's basically served the function of a monster, albeit an intelligent one with an evil plan. Since Ridley's never told Samus any disturbing shit like in the manga, I'd say he hasn't reached his full potential as a villain, and he shouldn't be taken out of the series until he's reached his full potential as a villain, because he has a lot of that, and he has not tapped into nearly as much as he could have. Similar situation with Mother Brain, though I don't think we'll be seeing her anytime soon. Maybe? I don't know. Despite her super intelligence, we've mostly learned about her actions and villainous plans and whatever from the manuals and opening cutscenes, while in-game she's basically just been a final boss who occasionally partakes in spying. Now, a lot of other Metroid villains besides Dark Samus, Ravenbeak, Ridley, Mother Brain, and the evil side of the Federation actually are just monsters who nearly wiped out entire races out of pure animal instinct. And despite sounding shallow, Metroid actually handles these villains really well. But the ones we know are intelligent and have a beef with Samus should act like it. Metroid Dread still has a good amount of talking and still doesn't break the isolationist atmosphere. Okay, well, there's a little bit too many conversations with Adam, but other than that. Now, circling back to Ravenbeak, there are a few complaints people have with him that I sadly can't defend. Despite understanding why it makes sense that there's some evil Chozo out there, it'd be nice, at the very least, if their character wasn't pretty shallow. And Ravenbeak's literal catchphrase is, "Power is everything." I feel like if Metroid Dread is a scan visor like the Prime series, then they could have had lore scans, which go deeper into the mocking culture, and explain exactly why they decided to go full power hungry and slaughter the Thoha for the Metroids, since we know that before that incident, the two tribes were friends, or at least allies. However, that does leave something good to add in for Metroid 6, eh? Ravenbeak and his Mocking brethren are pretty big deal villains, and I don't think you can have an as large-scale villain as a power-hungry Chozo warrior who gave Samus her warrior power in the first place to only be a one-timer. I know Ravenbeak was assimilated by the X and killed by Samus, I know ZDR went up, and I know all the other Mocking were infected by the X at other points, and then also went up with ZDR. But I can still, despite that, think of several ways around that. At least 3, and I don't think a lot of them would feel forced. So they could totally bring back Big Boy Ravenbeak for round 2, and hopefully flesh out his character a bit more. Speaking of things that I want to return in Metroid 6, X-Parasites. Back when Fusion was still the last game in the timeline, I knew they absolutely had to be in Metroid 5. The same way I think about Raven Beak in Metroid 6, I knew that the X were too big of a threat to be one-timers. It'd be a massive waste. Now, of course, they were in Metroid Dread. Woohoo! But I feel like while we're at it, we should give them a trilogy. Phazon got 3 games, Metroid's got 3 games, 2 remakes, a bad 4th game, and a lot of exposure in the games that weren't about Metroids. I think that the X-Parasites are more than a big enough deal to also get 3 games, while the Machins should get at least 2. If you make super big deal villains over and over and over and over and over for every new game, then each of their threats start to feel diminished. This person and their people is a massive threat to the galaxy. Throw him in the pile. We've defeated 20 different one of those. If you make a good bad guy, he shouldn't be thrown aside immediately. Don't shoehorn him into every new release, but don't throw him away either. Anyway, while Ravenbeak is relatively shallow, I think he makes up for that by fleshing out the Chozo as a species a bit more, being a villain who you actually interact with in a Metroid game, and just, like, he's really evil and cool. Like, even if he's shallow, he's also a badass bad guy. Like, who doesn't love badass bad guys? Okay? He was still standing and limping towards Samus, intending on doing a fight, after he got drained by Samus, who accidentally drained Idarash at the same time, enough to cause it to crash, despite the fact that it wasn't even her prime target, and it was probably getting like 20% of the drain that Ravenbeak was, and yet he was still standing after both that and the crash somehow, which honestly doesn't make much sense, and ready to keep fighting, even though, let's be real, at this point he'd get his ass kicked. And without the Metroid powers, he is the one bad guy that Samus could just straight up not beat, okay? She had the Super Saiyan Metroid powers that time, but I have a feeling that without that, 9 times out of 10, if not more, Ravenbeak would defeat her in combat. And that is really cool to have a villain who is straight up more powerful than the hero, just flat out. But this is still just my opinion. I know a lot of people who really like the Chozo, to the point where they're writing off Metroid Dread just because they have one evil one. Which I feel like is a bit extreme, but there are a lot of other things about the stuff which I do understand a bit more. I know why you don't... I understand why you guys don't like it, but I do think that Ravenbeak has enough redeeming qualities so that he should at least be considered in the B tier. I think him in the A tier. He's not quite in the S tier though. That is reserved for Riddles and Dark Samus. Even though Riddles hasn't reached his full potential, I want him to reach his full potential, please.